The 553rd edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
And that could make a difference. Lawson at the buzzer. Got it! Maybe not. Ty Lawson wins it at the buzzer.
Deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Gets the roll. Here we go. Page has it. Carolina down one. 84-83. Page into the front court with 4 seconds. Page to the rim. Got it! Got it! 9/10 of a second to go. Inbounds. Washington gets it to Warren. His full court shot. No good. Marcus Page baby. Does it for the Tar Heels. Carolina wins it.
Don't force it if you're Goss.
Comes in. Blocked by Meeks. Buried up ahead to Jackson. And he tucks it down for the 5-point lead. Matthews off the mark. And this year, the confetti is going to fall for North Carolina. They're not going to be denied this time. Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another live edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh and Anthony here with you live on a Monday night. Some more news for Carolina in the transfer portal. And I think news that we expected but was made official earlier today as they missed out on one of the top targets in the portal. But they quickly got involved with another potential transfer as well. We'll talk about that. And kind of talk about what this means for Vin Allen Luben's future and really just the state of the roster, because there are some people that, as I can see on Facebook and Twitter, for it to be, late April in full-blown panic mode about what Carolina is going to be next season. So we'll talk about that in tonight's edition of the show. Before we do any of that, though, we start every edition of the pod as we always do with the pod thought of the day. We've got a legendary NFL wide receiver, Jerry Rice, for today's pod thought. That thought is, quote, "Today I will do what others won't, so tomorrow I can accomplish what others can't," end quote. We talk a lot about accomplishing things here at Carolina. The goal on a year-in, year-out basis, win the ACC regular season title. I would say advance deep into the ACC tournament, and then have a team that's worthy of playing deep into the NCAA tournament, more preferably the Final Four. And what Hubert Davis is trying to do today and tomorrow is to put together a roster that would allow that to happen. And a way that could have really taken a step forward in a huge direction would have been if they landed Cal transfer Andre Stoyakovich, who officially committed to Illinois today out of the transfer portal. He chose Illinois over Carolina and Stanford. And to be quite honest, it was Illinois first, Stanford second, and Carolina actually finished third in the running for him after the Cardinal made a strong push over the weekend to try to get him back there with the program. This news was, expected. From the moment we started talking about Stoyakovich, we told you, look, he's probably going to Illinois, but it's a good sign that Carolina got involved. And then the fact that in 8 days, they were able to push his decision as far as they were able to push it, I think showed you that Carolina was able to put together a competitive offer. But this isn't an almost program. We don't celebrate, close. We don't celebrate coming in second. And the Heels, officially missed on a guy that, without a doubt, if Carolina would have added Stoyakovich to the roster, we'd be sitting here talking about bona fide top 15 team in the country entering the preseason and a team that you could legitimately pick to win the ACC when the media gathers in October to do all the preseason festivities.
Yeah, I mean, and now you're staring down a situation where more than likely you're going to go into the season without a 3. You don't have a wing player that really fits exactly what you're looking for unless you can find one and scramble here in the portal and find that guy. And maybe that ends up being the guy that we'll talk about here in a little bit, but that's a guy that's labeled more as a guard. So we'll have to see what exactly Carolina does. You know, it's one of those situations that Carolina, I guess they really didn't prepare for, but you could maybe get on the staff for not having a plan in place if Drake Powell was to end up entering the draft and ultimately leaving. I think that was something that was really unexpected from their standpoint. I think they thought that he might enter the draft, but that he would ultimately come back. But once he entered the draft, I think, Carolina really needed a plan that they could go to. And I don't think that Jonathan Powell should have been that plan. And, Stoyakovich was there. He was available. Carolina, this is the 3rd time now that they've tried to go after him. They tried to recruit him out of high school. They tried to recruit him last offseason, and they tried to recruit him this offseason. And all 3 times they have come up short. It's not really shocking that he's going to play at Illinois because Illinois is a team that has a lot of international flavor. They are willing to spend a lot of money. And I think the more concerning fact is that somehow Stanford got back in there, and they were actually the team that was probably going to land him if he did not go to Illinois. They were going to end up bringing him back because of the NIL money that they were able to raise for him. So, again, I don't know if Carolina just didn't feel like he was worth as much money as some of these other schools were offering. I don't know if Carolina didn't have as much money as some of these other schools are offering, but we kind of said it, man. One of the things that we wanted to see with Vin Allen Luben, in the transfer portal now and some money freed up with both him and Drake Powell off the books was Carolina go all in on this prospect. And I mean, maybe they did, and it still wasn't enough. If that's the case, then there's really nothing you can do about it, because if they're willing to pay the amount of money that you were paying 2 guys on your team that were both very important pieces, then there's really nothing you can do about that. So I'll be interested to see if we find out the number that he ended up making at Illinois, because I'd be interested to see how much it actually is. But it definitely leaves Carolina in a spot where this roster has a glaring need once again, just like it was last offseason. Now, the thing is that it's still much, much earlier than last offseason. Carolina can still go out and find some guys. There are some guys that are available in the portal that they can go after, but it's drying up quickly. We saw today 2 different guys at the position end up committing. Chad Baker-Mazara commits to USC, and then Darian Reed, the transfer from Alabama, commits to Oklahoma earlier this evening. So Carolina, if they're going to jump in on someone else, they really got to start making those waves now, because the longer that they wait, the harder it's going to be.
It does feel like, I think, that Carolina is in a position where the lack of that settlement being passed and that revenue sharing being kicked into effect, I think is hurting them. Because it does feel like they're tapped out from their NIL collective. And I think, on the surface, that's going to draw criticism. I think it's important to remember, look how many pieces Carolina is bringing in. You've already landed 5 transfers. You're bringing in 3 freshmen, and one of them is a top 10 prospect in the class. So it's not like Carolina hasn't spent money this offseason. They've probably spent as much as they've spent, since Hubert Davis got to Carolina and since NIL became a thing. Can't confirm that, but I would just think with 8 new guys coming in, they've spent a pretty penny. And I think it's why, you got the situation with Lubin, who said, hey, that settlement gets passed. That extra money that you would imagine would be set aside for basketball gets made available to me. I'll be back, And right now, I don't think Carolina has that. Tom Browning comments with us right here on YouTube was told UNC only has $700,000 to spend in the NIL collective, so no more big-time players for us. I mean, if that's true, then yeah, Carolina's not landing a guy like Andre Stoyakovich. You're at that rate, you could get a good role player, but you're getting a role player, a guy that, when you maybe would be pressed into starting duty, but Stoyakovich, you would imagine, was going to command, I don't know, north of $2 million, close to $3 million. And rightfully so. He's a fantastic player, a terrific player who I think is going to excel in Champaign. I think he's going to be fun to watch in Brad Underwood's up-tempo offense. I think, he'll be a guy that'll really elevate his game to the next level. And so that's why this is such a big miss for Carolina because of what they could have added to the roster. But if you ever once thought and believed he was coming to Carolina, then you were setting yourself up for failure because how late the Heels got in on him to begin with. And if you want to criticize Hubert Davis for that, be my guest. That's not something I'm necessarily going to do because I think what happened is what caught them more off guard wasn't the fact Drake Powell going through the draft. I think it's the fact that he did not really leave the door open to return. The only way that's going to happen now is if he goes to the combine and has a Shedeur Sanders-like experience, and he has to come crawling back to college, which hopefully, I selfishly would like that for Carolina. I would not want him to go, have such a bad weekend where his NBA dreams has to be delayed a year. I think that's what caught them off guard more than anything. Was because I think a lot of the people's expectations around the industry was for him to test the waters, but to ultimately be back in school. I was listening to the Eye on College Basketball podcast today. Both Matt Norlander and Gary Parrish said that decision really caught them off guard, that he did not leave the door open to return, that it seems that he is going forward with his NBA future. So I think that's what maybe they were quote unquote unprepared for. And if you want to blame Hubert and the staff, that's fine. You could also blame Drake Powell for not being a little bit more upfront when he started going through the thinking process. Hey, this is the way I'm leaning. I think that's more I'm going pro all the way as opposed to leaving the door open. So, as of right now, does Carolina need another difference maker on the wing? Absolutely. If you really want to elevate this roster to ACC championship contending status and a team that could legitimately make the second weekend of the tournament, I'm not going to disagree with that. I do think that the overreaction to where the roster is in totality is kind of hilarious. Because this roster has a glaring need like last year's roster did. I think this roster is better top to bottom than last year's roster was. Because this roster right now, no, you don't have a 2,000-point scorer in it like RJ Davis, but you're deeper. You've got more flexibility. You've got the ability to do something. And I think what we got to keep in mind is Caleb Wilson is a tweener. He can play the 3 or he can play the 4. I think optimally you want him playing the 4. I think you want him in that Harrison Ingram role. But what makes him the prospect that he is, why he's going to be so valuable, is that I think if he has to play the 3 and Carolina goes big with a Jaren Stevenson at the 4, whoever, I think Carolina is going to be much better off for the majority of the season this upcoming year than they were this past season. And so I think that's important to remember. Yes, as of this moment, this roster has a need. Carolina needs to address that need. But I still think top to bottom, this is a better roster right now that Hubert Davis has put together than what he put together last offseason.
Yeah, I think it's better right now. How much better, I don't really know, because the one thing about playing Caleb Wilson at the 3 is you're playing him at a position. So we've seen this before where Carolina has done this with guys a la Pete Nance, and it didn't necessarily work out for them. They misused him. So, is that going to be a similar situation with Caleb Wilson where you're forced to do that because you couldn't get the wing player that you needed, or you couldn't get Drake Powell to end up returning? I think that's ultimately going to be the question for Carolina. In an ideal world, you're not playing him at the 3. He's got too much game with his back to the basket to be able to play him at the 3. You're looking to play him more at that 4 spot and have Jaren Stevenson come off the bench, because in an ideal world, Jaren Stevenson is not a starter for you either, because he, wasn't really a full-time starter ever at Alabama. He certainly does not have the offensive game. His game is not nearly complete enough for him to be a high-level starter yet at Carolina. So we'll see what ends up happening. That could be an offseason of development that helps him take that jump. But in my ideal world, they are going out and they are finding somebody else that can help them at that spot. I do not want to play Caleb Wilson at the 3 spot, but I think they're probably going to be put in a scenario where that's going to be the way that they're going to have to go. They're not going to play small again this year. They're not going to do it. It doesn't matter even if they get a guy that's 6'5", 6'6" that can play out there on the wing. Unless they really believe in Jonathan Powell like that, I don't see how they're going to end up rolling with a guy that is, that size that can play the wing. I mean, with Powell too, really a guy that played more 2-guard than anything when he was at West Virginia last year. So it'll be interesting to see him sort of adjusting to some of the more athletic players that he would have to be responsible for on the defensive end of the floor. That's the thing that I think you're starting to get a little bit worried about, is what does Carolina do defensively? I know that there are people that are going to be concerned with what Carolina does offensively, but for me, it's more of what are they going to do defensively. That's probably the area where Caleb Wilson is probably your best option, because he can cover anywhere from the 4 to the 2 spot with pretty good success. But does his offensive game fit exactly what you're going to need out there on the wing? I don't know if that's necessarily the case. So this is one of those scenarios where if you could find a way to bring somebody else in there, if you could get Jameer Watkins to come back to school and Carolina goes all in on him, although if he ends up coming back, I think a lot of people have said that he's going to be somewhere in that $2-3 million range. That's probably an area Carolina is not going to be able to play in. Same thing with RJ Lewis, if he was to end up coming back as well. So I don't really know what Carolina can do right now if they truly don't have the money. They might just be stuck with the roster that they have, which, to me kind of leaves me scratching my head as to why Jaden Young was a take. I got to be honest, that doesn't really make sense to me, because, that's a guy that you could have had at any time. Leaving that money freed up to potentially go after somebody that would be a game changer on the wing makes a lot more sense to me than bringing in more help in that backcourt where you figured you were probably already pretty stocked and loaded and ready to go back there.
Yeah, we talked about it when he committed last Friday. Obviously a depth piece, a guy that's going to come off the bench. I think, I think the biggest interest in him was really taking a lot of pressure off those freshmen, to where, those guys, and I think those guys will play quite a bit in November and December and maybe into early January. I think in an ideal world, when you get to that first Duke game, their minutes are spare. And that was not going to be the case unless you brought in another guy that could come off the bench, run your offense. And, first off, the guy wanted to be a Tar Heel. We know Hubert Davis values that. He grew up a Carolina guy. So, I think, he'd be a good addition to the culture that we're still trying to establish, quite frankly, under Hubert Davis. And as I'll reiterate, he went to go play for Mike Young. Mike Young doesn't recruit you unless you can shoot the ball. Like, I do think he can and will shoot the ball better than what he did during his time in Blacksburg. We mentioned Carolina got involved with another transfer, and this was, this news came out about an hour after, the Stoyakovich news, it was pretty much made official. So Carolina misses on Stoyakovich, but give credit to Hubert Davis, Jim Tanner, and this staff. They didn't just, sit around and pout and whine about it. They rolled their sleeves up. They got back to work, and there's been interest shared on both parties with USC transfer Desmond Claude, a guy that averaged 15.8 points per game, 3.5 rebounds, 4.2 assists, shot 48% from the field, 31% from three this past year in his career between his stops between Xavier and Southern Cal. He's a 12.3 point per game scorer, 3.4 rebounds, 3.1 assists, has shot 45% from the field, 27% from three. He'll be in Gainesville later this week. He'll have a visit with the Gators. Kansas and Virginia are both involved as well. And I think the most important thing is, the only reason why he's even on the market is because his head coach recruited over him. Eric Musselman brought Rodney Rice in from Maryland and paid him north of $3 million to come play for him. And that's what has allowed Claude to enter the portal. He's 6'5", so you're talking about a guard that, fits the criteria as someone that's got legitimate size, something that Hubert Davis has been very adamant about this off season. But, with the school like Florida involved, who A, just won the national championship, B, has $10 million at their disposal to rebuild their roster, with Kansas involved, and then Virginia. Carolina's got the work cut out with this transfer portal recruitment as well. So what do you make of Carolina quickly shifting its focus after missing out on Stoyakovich to the USC transfer Desmond Claude?
No, they're looking for more scoring. They're looking for a guy that is going to be able to come in and take this offense to another level. You look at the numbers from last year, and they were sensational in terms of just volume and scoring the basketball. The year prior, this is back-to-back years of similar production for him. Even higher field goal percentage this year. Shot 48% from the field, best shooting percentage from three by far as well of his career at just 30.7%. That's probably the one concern that you have with him, is that that's not necessarily a strength of his, but he drives the basket so well that it doesn't really matter. He's a guy that shoots 52% from inside the arc. That's pretty damn good, especially for a guy that is a guard. So I really like, what he brings to the table. I think he's certainly a guy that Carolina should be all over. Love the way that he passes the ball as well. The thing with him that's interesting is you watch a lot of the film from him on YouTube, and, college basketball scouting, by the way, does a tremendous job with this. We have not shouted them out really throughout this entire process, but they put up the videos of all of these different guys, break down the film in a great way so that you understand all of the different things about his game. And, the thing about him is that he, it looks like he played a lot on the ball when he was at USC. It looked like he was pretty much their primary ball handler. That would not be the role that he would have to take here at Carolina. And I think that probably would serve him a little bit better. A guy that is used to playing in a very ball screen heavy type of system. That's pretty much how he scores the ball. 46% of the time when he scores the basketball, it's him being the ball screen handler, which is in the 73rd percentile. So definitely a guy that is going to fit the system that Carolina wants to run. If he ends up committing to Carolina, I think this is one that you got to push for. Another big scoring guard. We've talked about the concerns that we have with Seth Trimble, how we feel like if he was to come off the bench, it might even be a little bit better for him. And I think, if Carolina can get him, that sort of takes the pressure off of a guy like Derek Dixon to have to contribute right away this year. If he does end up contributing something for you, that's great. It also would make it much easier where if you do have to run a three-guard system, you have the depth there that you're going to need, because you're going to need to rotate guys in and out. So I definitely think this is an option for Carolina and one that they're seriously looking at. And I think it's the right move. I think he's a guy that, with a little bit less pressure on him to score the basketball, maybe he becomes a little bit more efficient. But I just love the way that he drives the basket. We've talked about the guards being aggressive, and I think he fits that to a T. And so I would definitely be all in for Carolina to take a shot on the Desmond Claude, who is a little bit better than the Claude that Carolina got out of the transfer portal this past season.
I think he would be your perfect complementary piece to Kai and Evans to really round out that backcourt and really put that backcourt in a position to be the primary focal point and the strength of your team. I think the way you look at Carolina right now, it would be a team it's going to be much more balanced, where I think you're going to need kind of production from all areas. You add this guy to your roster, Carolina is going to be guard dependent, which there's nothing wrong with that because guard play is what wins in March. Look at what Florida just did winning the national championship. Their trio of guards were collectively and individually sensational throughout their run through the NCAA tournament. So, you look at the size. I think that's a big thing that really stands out because Carolina would just get bigger in the backcourt, and I think that's a necessity that Hubert Davis is looking to continue to add. And then just the efficiency. He needs to shoot the three ball better. There's no doubt, but if you can be that efficient from two, that would do some wonders for Carolina's offense because one of the things that this offense struggled to do last year, even with RJ, was they could get to the rim. They couldn't score at the rim. And I think that's going to be a big focal point for Carolina this offseason is being able to finish stronger at the basket. And then, as much as RJ's mid-range jump shot was a good jump shot for him, they didn't shoot the ball well. And so those points that you were getting, on a nightly basis 2 years ago, all of a sudden those points were not there. And it was a big reason why Carolina's offense was inconsistent like it was this past season. I think the biggest takeaway that I have come to the realization, and I got told off the record this earlier today, and I think it's going to add up. I don't see Vin Allen Luben coming back. Maybe unless Carolina swings and misses on all the guys they continue to go after. But I do think that as much as he wants to return, it does feel like Carolina, with how aggressively they were going after Stoyakovich, because you would imagine that the money they were offering him was Vin Allen Luben's money. And if the interest in Claude becomes significant, like the money that they were going to pay him is going to be used to maybe get this guy into Chapel Hill. I don't think he's going to be back. And I don't know what that means for next season, because if Carolina adds Zayden High, you still got enough bodies. You still got, I think, some versatility in the front court that you want, that you need. We're both really high on James Brown. Are you in lockstep with me when it comes to Vin Allen Luben, a guy that when the season ended, we said, hey, we want him back, we need him back? And we've kind of acted, up until he entered the portal last week as if he were going to come back. But in the last week or so, with just the way that Carolina has aggressively pursued other transfers, I don't think Vin Allen Luben will be a Tar Heel this time next year.
Yeah, which is stunning considering where we were at when he chose to enter the portal. But this is kind of, he did it to himself. He was the one that decided to put his name into the portal. Carolina can't wait around and just let him basically control them. And, especially with the position that is so glaring at that wing spot, that wing forward spot, Carolina needed to be aggressive. They needed to go out and try to get somebody else. And look, Andre Stoyakovich, that's one of those players where you just have to admit to yourself, if you're Vin Allen Luben, that he's a better player than you. And he would fit what Carolina needs on this roster. When they went out and got Jaren Stevenson, I think that was sort of a shot across the bow to Vin Allen Luben that, hey, you're either with us or you're off, because we brought him in. He's a guy that, fits that 4 spot very well. That's a spot that we would, like you to play a little bit this year alongside of Henry Vasar, but we would also like to have you as a backup big. And I always kind of thought that was going to be an issue, was if he wasn't going to be a starter, you really felt like he was going to probably enter the transfer portal. Now, this is a move that seems like it was almost necessary because of possible roster limitations by this new house settlement. But I mean, we have no idea. This is one of the more confusing situations that's out there right now, because when it comes to the roster limitations, I don't know the specifics of the roster limitations that this lawsuit would have. I don't know if that means that they're limiting scholarships again. I don't know what exactly it means, but from all accounts, this was a good move on his part. But now it means that he's more than likely going to be going somewhere else. And Carolina, I mean, right now, it feels like they've got to add somebody else. I'm not as concerned about the collection of big men that Carolina has behind Henry Vasar, behind, possibly Jaron Stevenson starting at the 4, or Caleb Wilson. I think that James Brown, serviceable big man that I think is going to continue to grow in this system. Zayden High, if he comes back, is a guy that can play either that 4 or 5 spot. So you're going to still have that versatility there with a player like him. But yeah, I mean, the thing is you're just wondering, where is the money from Drake Powell and Vin Allen Luben? Where is that going towards? Is that all going towards Jaden Young? Is there money left over that Carolina just doesn't want to spend? Because there are still some guys that Carolina should be going after in the transfer portal that I think could help them at that wing spot. It's just, are they going to actually go after these guys? Because it's getting late now. There are some guys that you feel like if they were going to be involved with these guys, they would have already been involved with them. So I think it really comes down to Desmond Claude, and you look at some of the names that are involved with him. I mean, if Florida is serious about going after him, that's going to be an incredibly tough one for Carolina to outclass, in terms of the amount of money that's probably going to be available. Same thing with a school like Kansas. So, I mean, yeah, Carolina is in a tough spot in the pursuit of adding another guy to this roster. And I didn't think we would be at this point in this offseason, especially with how it was going when it looked like Vin Allen Luben was still going to be on this roster.
Yeah, I think just to reiterate what we said earlier, I think Drake Powell's decision to effectively turn pro is what caught them off guard. And I think they were prepared for him to come back. He was going to play the 3. Wilson would play the 4. We're going to stack as much talent and depth behind those 2 positions as possible. And Carolina had done that. If Powell were to be back next season, Carolina would have the deepest front court they've had, the most talent they've had in the front court collectively since Hubert Davis took over. If Drake Powell is not here, and I think it's fair to assume that he will not be here this time, or when the season gets started, then there's going to be there comes a hole that Carolina's got to find a way to mask. And who knows, maybe you find something that works with that 3-guard lineup, which, and it's important to remember, Carolina's best season under Hubert Davis, they played with 3 guards, a forward, and a big. So I don't think Hubert Davis is turned off from playing that way after what happened this past season. What happened this past season was there was a point in time where your best lineup was 4 guards and a big. And you learned the hard way with some of the talent and some of the schools you went up against. You can't win and compete like that on a night-in, night-out basis, even with the ACC having a quote-unquote bad season. So I think it does add a little bit more stress to him because I don't think he'll be as comfortable as he could have been if Drake Powell were to be back. But I still think when you look at this thing from top to bottom, with all the uncertainty just around the program in general, when the season came to an end and we weren't quite sure how this whole front office thing was going to work, I still think you got to give them a ton of credit that they've put the program in a better position than it was when the season ended. And we told them we need to go get a big man. They went and got a big man. We told you had to go replace R.J. Davis. They went and they brought in a guy to hopefully do that. I don't think Kai Davis is going to be exactly R.J., but I'm telling you guys, the kid's going to be a star. And they're going to give him the keys to the engine and let him go be a guy that can score 17, 18 points per game, shoot 48% from the field, 38% from three, and be an all-ACC caliber player. And so before the Powell thing kind of popped up and then the Lubin thing popped up, this roster was sitting in a really good spot. And this is just kind of the nature of the beast with the way that this portal goes, is that while you think you're sitting there sitting pretty and these guys are going left and right and the portal's drying up, well, you get a late portal entry from a Vin Allen Luben. You get finally a decision from a Drake Powell, and it's left Hubert Davis scrambling. And I think what's the positive is because Jim Tanner's in place, they've had a plan. Now they got to execute it, but are we confident that if this happened a year ago, they would have pivoted so quickly from Stoyakovich to a Desmond Claude? That answer would have been no. Because the Carolina, it felt like last year, was continuously behind the eight ball. I don't think that's the case this year. I think they see these things as far as all the way through. They get their answer. If it's a good answer, great. If it's a bad answer, well, we're going to the next. And so that's their task right now, is finding that next guy. And if you find that next guy and he can be a difference maker on the wing, then I think all this panic and all this hysteria would be all for naught, because they're a piece away, whether it's the return of Drake Powell or the addition of someone from the portal, from this being a roster that's clearly top 3 in the ACC. That's clearly top 15 to 20 in the country. And that's one that I think you could talk about as the season progresses, making the second weekend of the tournament. And if Carolina does that, I think that all eases our concerns about Hubert Davis, all of our doubts about Hubert Davis. If not, then the results will be what the results will be. And he's either going to do enough to remain on the sidelines or he's not. And I think he's positioned himself to give himself a good chance to ensure he's here for the long haul, which you should be rooting for, by the way. Like, if you're a Carolina fan, and once again, I'm seeing these comments on Facebook and Twitter, you should be rooting for that to be the case. You should be rooting for Hubert Davis to win enough games next year where we're not talking about his job in January or February. Because as much as I, wanted Wes Miller when the job came open, he's not ready for this type of job. And there's not another clear-cut candidate ready to come in here and take over. So we got to wait and see how this stuff plays out. We still got, a long way to go this offseason before we even get to the season. But, you're not doing yourself any favors as a fan if you're sitting here in April and you're already complaining about next season. You're going to live a miserable offseason, and it's going to be a miserable existence. Root for the guy to find the guy that we need. Root for the guy to find the guy that we want, so we can win the way that we expect to win next season, and we can have a lot more fun on this podcast. So, and no matter what happens the rest of the offseason, guess what? We'll be here to talk about it because we've been here all offseason long. We've had you covered on the podcast and, of course, on the website. That's where we'll direct you next. HeelToughBlog.com. All the news from today, you can find that on the website, the Andre Stoyakovich news, and Carolina showing interest in USC transfer Desmond Claude. Whatever happens moving forward in the portal, of course, I'll have you covered with all that information, as well as I continue to keep you up to date on all things Carolina basketball. Tar Heel football, chaos in Chapel Hill with Bill Belichick's program. Thank God the spring window, the spring portal is finally closed, because Carolina lost more than enough production than they could afford to replace. And Anthony had you covered on every single player that Carolina lost to the portal and every single player that Carolina has brought into the portal. Programming note, we'll be live on the Heel Tough Vlog podcast tomorrow night to talk about all that and the latest involving Bill Belichick and his girlfriend. So make sure you're getting familiar with the website, HeelToughVlog.com, for the latest and the best coverage of Carolina basketball and Tar Heel football. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform. Simply search the Four Corners Podcast and we will pop up. There, we encourage you guys, rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any editions of the show throughout the remainder of the off season. So with that, guys, this is going to wrap up this edition of another live show. I'd like Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.